Well, thank you, Anna, for leading us in worship today. And I was telling some of our friends over here just to the side as we're praying for these two young men who are just dedicating their lives in baptism today to Jesus, making public that step. Like, I never get tired of seeing people declare with their whole heart, even at a young age, how good God is and how he's changed them. And people tell me all the time, the last likely person to get baptized is a young man. And I want to just call, that's not true, because it happens here all the time. And I just love that, and I think it's really worth celebrating as a church for us to just celebrate God's activity, that no one is gone, right? We believe that all people want to find God, and God wants to be found by all people. Well, I just want to say hi. My name's Dan. I'm one of the pastors on staff here. If I don't know you, we've got 2 invitations for all of us today, but the first invitation that I want to talk about is just for those who are new or newer to Heartland. Right after this service, I want to invite you to stay for just a couple moments. You can connect with us in the hub. Brad Herndon, who's one of our lead pastors, wants to just give you a little bit about the type of church that you've walked into today, in case you're wondering, how do I help get connected into the life of this church so that maybe it can have the same effect on me that it's had on these people here. Right after the service, go out, give us 5 minutes. We'll tell you 5 things about Heartland that'll help you connect. That's the first way to connect. The second way to connect is going to come all the way at the end of our service today, right around the 12 o'clock mark in the service. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to give you a very emotional appeal for why you should do something crazy. And half of you are going to say, you're nuts, I'm never doing that. And listen, look at me, eyes really quick. I'm good with you just saying whatever. But I don't know if God's good with you saying that, and so I'm going to leave that up in the Holy Spirit, twist your arm type of way. I'm just kidding. I want to preload this to let you know that I truly have no emotional appeal or anything like that for you. I just want to give you an opportunity. And if for some reason you connect with it, that's great. If you don't, that's also great. There's many ways that people follow Jesus here in our church, but I want to let you know that's coming right at the end of the service. In the meantime, I want to talk about smoking. Is that okay if I talk about smoking? It's 1964, and I can see some of the people in the room who are 4 years old at that point. There was a guy, the Surgeon General of the United States of America is this guy. His name is Luther Terry. Luther Terry, Surgeon General of the United States of America. For the first time in history, a Surgeon General made a public declaration that he believed indeed there was a link between cigarette smoke and lung cancer. This was a really big deal because at this time, 1964, I don't know if you have a grandparent like mine who used to smoke like a chimney in 1964, but nearly half of adults in America habitually use cigarettes. And it was because of the marketing efforts of big tobacco companies that would make you want to look like the Marlboro Man or women be like the empowered Virginia Slim woman. I mean, these are ads from the 1960s. I mean, this guy looks pretty dang tough. She looks like she's got life figured out. And even today, in the 1960s ads that were really fueling people's use of tobacco products, in advertising agencies today, they look back on these as success stories for how to actually move a whole entire group of people to use your product. And once 1964 came and Luther Terry put on every carton of smokes across the country that this product will give you lung cancer. Do you know what happened? Rates of smoking instantly plummeted overnight, and actually those companies went bankrupt and nobody ever smoked ever again. It's an interesting advertisement history because what we learned from the 1960s and the Surgeon General's warning is that, surprise, surprise, it takes more than facts to change our behavior. Studies over the decades have conclusively proven something funny about people. It's this: we are not rational beings. Can I get an amen? Can you just admit to yourself, we are not rational people, are we? What we thought would have been true is that you just tell someone, hey, if you take this product, it's going to cause you problems down the road. People would stop taking the product, but in fact, that's not the way that humans are wired. We have this capacity to ignore the problems down the road for a little bit of pleasure today. You are not so unique that you don't do this. I don't know who pounded a whole entire sleeve of Oreos last night, or who drank too much, or who bet too much yesterday on the Kentucky Derby, or whatever it is, your thing that caused you a little bit of pain down the road for a little bit of pleasure today. All of us are like this. We are not as rational as we like to believe. And hear this coming from someone whose job is called the teaching pastor. Right? I mean, I'm into rationales, I'm into intelligence and teaching, but we are not rational beings. In fact, there are sociologists. I don't know if we can start with a little sociology, but sociologists who study human behavior, they're called behavior economists. The fact that that's even a thing should tell us all we need to know about ourselves. But behavior economists, they try to understand why we do something that's not in our own best interest, even though we know it's not in our own best interests. They tell us that the phenomenon of indulging in something today at a cost of something tomorrow, there's a name for it. There's a problem for why we do this. And it's a very long word. I don't know if you really care about it. It's called the intertemporal problem. Intertemporal problem. It means this. It means that there's a difference between times and ages or even eons between when we receive the benefit of a thing compared to the cost. If you've ever racked up credit card debt, you've experienced intertemporal problem. If you've ever had that fourth piece of cheesecake because you swore to yourself, I'll pay for this later, but right now it's so good, that's the intertemporal problem. If you've ever said to yourself, I'll pay for this later, you've shown that you know the intertemporal problem. And so in smoking, in 1964, the facts of health come out, and nothing changed. The problem with smoking wasn't a knowledge gap. It was an information to action gap. What Neil Postman describes in one of his books, Amusing Ourselves to Death. He says that the telegraph, I don't have time to get into this, but he says the telegraph broke our communication and broke our intentionality such that when we received news and information, we no longer were moved to action. Look at all the hashtags that you've activated on your own social media feeds over the past 10 years. How many of those hashtags have you actually done something about as opposed to just tweeting about them? There's a gap between our information and our action these days. And once anti-smoking ads picked up on the fact that the way to change people's behavior wasn't just about by giving them warnings and facts, but about appealing to what the actual future would be like in an emotional way, nothing changed. Nothing changed in our country until real people whose real lives had really been damaged by smoking were really put on TV, who were really put in newspapers in an emotional sense, in like, Sarah McLachlan with all the puppies type of sense, you know what I mean? With all the music playing and all the heartstrings and everything. Once we pulled on heartstrings, all of a sudden rates of smoking significantly declined to about 17% of the population today engages. Now, I don't care if you smoke. That's your thing. What I want to say is every once in a while in our culture, there's this moment where we have to spend decades studying a thing, and I, as a pastor, want to say, it's been in the Bible this whole time, okay? And as we as a church get to the end of the Sermon on the Mount, what we're going to see is that Jesus has given you some facts. Jesus has given you some warnings, and what he's going to do is actually solve the intertemporal problem for us today, but he's not going to leave you off the hook, and he's not going to solve it for you. Actually, he's going to call you to an action that is haunting and hard and really harrowing, but if you follow through on it, it will be the best life you could ever imagine for yourself. Anybody in on this? Anybody interested in this? I want to tell you that if you are the type of person like me who grew up in the church, today you have to shed yourself of the little Sunday school song that you learned that taught you this story. And you need to like fight really hard today to hear the real severe challenge that Jesus is putting before us. And I also want to tell you, if you're new to Jesus or you're new to church and you don't have all of the baggage from the past that maybe sometimes you secretly wish you knew, like the secret inside handshake type stuff, you're at an advantage today. Because you actually can hear the words of Jesus as if they were from the first time, and you actually might be able to pick up the nuance that some of us miss from our familiarity. So Jesus, at the end of his teaching, he gives us a couple of warnings. Do not judge, lest ye be judged. So grateful for Caitlin Chess, who came in a couple weeks ago to help us with that. And the last weekend, Pastor Brad gave us the 3 warnings that Jesus gives, saying, watch out about the path that you walk, watch out about the prophets that you listen to, and watch out about the promises that you look forward to. And that's the most haunting of all for me, that not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will be welcomed into my kingdom, Jesus said. He tells us all at the end of this, the Surgeon General's warning that Jesus is giving us is that this: conventional wisdom, cliche teachings, and cultural Christianity. These are all the ways in which we think we can try and change or improve our lives today. This is like the default mode of us getting better lives, is to have conventional wisdom. If you've ever followed anyone on Instagram, chances are they just have conventional wisdom. Cliche teachings. If you've ever gone to like a church like this one, and maybe the person who spoke like really didn't know Jesus, they just gave you a bunch of conventional cliches. Jesus says, watch out for those people because they've got a secret agenda. Maybe worst of all for us living in 2024, Jesus says, he says, those of us who go through all this life thinking that we're doing all this stuff for God, in your name didn't we do all these things, is what Jesus says. Just a couple of verses before the one I'm going to read to you. He says, in your name we drove out demons, and in your name we performed many miracles, and in your name we prophesied. You know what that's called? That's called nominal Christianity. In your name. And Jesus says, you may have used my name, but you don't know my heart. And then Jesus tells this story to put everything on the bottom shelf for us. He says it's not by these things, conventional wisdom, cliche teachings, cultural Christianity, that you're going to actually grow and transform and have the life that your heart aches deeply for. It's actually something different. He tells a story. He tells a story about something that he knew intimately well, practically a story. It's a story that all of us can relate to. It's a story that's not very complicated. It is simple, but it is serious. And here's the story. Jesus says, whoever listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise and the winds beat against that house, it won't collapse because it's built on bedrock, like Fred Flintstone. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish, like a person who builds a house on sand. When the rains and the floods come and the winds beat against that house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. And Jesus drops the mic and walks off the mountain, and everyone stands there and goes, wow. I don't have the guts to ever preach a sermon and end it this way. Partly because I think the meaning would be lost on all of us, and you walk out of here confused. You might never come back. You'd be like, man, that guy's really intense. He's really kind of confusing. It seemed to be really, really crazy. But if I'm giving the greatest sermon, like hypothetical situation, this is very hypothetical, but if I'm giving the greatest sermon that you've ever heard, it's probably ending with a poem or some song or like some very special charge. But Jesus ends his greatest teaching with a great concern. He gives a warning, and then he gives a claim. The claim of Jesus is twofold. He says this, that Jesus' teachings are foundational blueprints to the good life. If you want to know, once and for all, how do I get the good life? Jesus makes this one claim. He says, come to me, listen to me, and do what I say, and you will have a good, secure, safe, enjoyable, fruitful life. He says, anyone who hears my words and does them is wise, because it's like a person who follows the blueprints. The second foundational truth is very similar to this. Not only do we have the blueprints, but it's practicing Jesus' teachings is how we build the good life. I don't know if you heard it in the time that I just shared the story, but Jesus uses the metaphor of building a house. Today we treat our houses as properties, as commodities. I had a friend who had moved 11 times, and he had kids that were all under the age of 5. And I was like, bro, what are you doing to your family? And he just couldn't help himself. He was like, he goes, my house is a commodity. It hits a certain point in the market where I just can't resist selling. I sell it, I go build another one. I was like, man, you're either not very handy and your furnace broke and so you just bought a new house, or you're a genius and I can't figure out which it is. But today we just treat our houses like, commodities. It's just a number on a sheet of paper. We don't treat our homes the way Jesus would treat the homes of people in Jesus' day. And here's what I mean. Back in Jesus' day, your home was the center of your entire life. To build a home was to build your life. Today, if you get engaged, you might save a little bit of money for a ring. You might save a little bit of money for a down payment. You might even move in with your parents to save up some money. I mean, I know it's just how the way the world is these days. But eventually, you and your spouse want to go get into their own house, and so you save up and then you go buy a place. But not so in Jesus' day. When a young man was engaged or betrothed to a young woman, it was the man's job to spend roughly 10 to 12 months building a home for the two of them. And you wouldn't go buy a piece of property. You would just find a scrap part of the house that you grew up in, and you would make an addition onto this home. And you would create for yourself a home off of your family's land. And oftentimes, you would start to crowd out all of the bedrock on the home, and you would have to figure out how to dig deeper and deeper. And successive generations would have to actually do a little bit more work to make sure that the house was solid so that the house wouldn't fall apart in a storm. Now, they didn't have the same construction codes that we have here in Kansas, which are designed to help all of our houses withstand an F5 tornado, right? My house is not constructed that way, but maybe yours is. There were no building codes. It was just a matter of wisdom. And a wise man would build an incredibly strong house. In fact, many of you who work at Black & Veatch or Burns & McDonnell, you'd appreciate this because they would over-engineer the house to make sure that it could stand the test of time. A good man will build a good home for his family because he knew that home was going to provide for his business. If you ever had a business deal, people would come to your house. If you've ever said the phrase to someone in a business deal, hey, you know where I live, or even worse, if you've ever said this, I know where you live, you're getting back to the old ancient practice of what Jesus was saying is that your home was your life. For Jesus to use this metaphor then, he's very clearly not talking about construction or the type of house that you live in or whether it's hurricane-proof or whatnot. He just wants you to know all of us build a life. You are building a life, friends. Do you know that? Many of us look at our lives and I'm building a career, I'm building a business, I'm building a foundation for my family. But you are building at the fabric of who you are, the fabric of who I am. I'm building a life. Jesus says there are two ways to go about this. The wise person who hears Jesus' teachings and does what he says is like the person who put their house upon bedrock. I grew up in the Chicagoland area, and Lake Michigan is a life source for that region. Almost everyone is clued into what's happening in the lake over in Lake Michigan. And I've learned not so about Kansans. Kansans' eyes gloss over when I talk about Lake Michigan. But let me just tell you something about Lake Michigan. It's crazy. People in Michigan will build their house very close to the shore. And that's partly because the western edge of Michigan gets the sunset over Lake Michigan, and it is divine. I've never been to Hawaii. If you want to take me to Hawaii, I'll bet you that a sunset in August on Lake Michigan rivals a sunset in Hawaii. It is just unreal. It is gorgeous. It touches the depths of your soul. The problem is that the western side of Michigan is very sandy. It's actually dunes. And if you know anything about the dunes are giant mountains of sand. But unlike mountains, these things move. Dunes can move upwards of 65 feet every year just because of the wind. We don't think about mountains moving, but dunes actually move. If you did a time-lapse photography over the course of the year, you would see these things have shape and they have life. And in the 1960s, the 1970s, some people with a lot of money bought some land right on the lake shore and they put some houses on it. And to build their house, they just took big logs like telephone poles and they would just drive it deep down into the sand to try and give themselves a sturdy foundation. Well, within the past 5 years, the ecology of the lake has kind of gone up and gone down, and such erosion has happened around the edge of the lake what is happening is that actually these houses that were built on the edge are now realizing they were built in the wrong place. This is a real picture of a real house that used to be really gorgeous. And this is just one of many. It's a great Google search if you're ever bored. Just, houses falling into Lake Michigan gets you a ton of gold. And this person found out that over time, building their house upon the sand caused this house to be condemned. It's literally the language that we use. It's condemned. It's a condemned house. You go, of course it's condemned. Nobody wants to live in this. And there's actually quite physically a separation happening between the house that is built on top and the foundation that is below, where the foundation is shifting and changing and the house is about to fall into the lake. I take it not many people in Kansas kind of realize this was going on, because both services you've all been like, what? Jesus says, wisdom builds your house in the right place. And what we have to hear is what Jesus says. He teaches to the people who have made it to the end of his sermon. They're not the people who got up and walked out. They're the people who are still there. And he says to them, all of you have heard my teaching. And the wise person is the one who doesn't just hear it, but they do it, and their life will be secured. And the foolish person is the one who has heard everything I've said and has kind of washed your hands and said, well, that fits nicely into my categories, but I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to cherry pick. You're a cafeteria type of Christian where I'm just a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I think I don't want all of Jesus, I just want the nice parts of Jesus. I'm not going to take all of him, I'm just going to take parts of him. And what Jesus says is that not only do the same people hear his words, the same people who respond differently, some practicing, some not, will experience the same problems in life. The genius of Jesus' teaching is not if the storms come in your life, but rather this, when the storms come in this life. This is one of the things I love about Jesus so much, is that Jesus has never said to any of us, listen. Jesus never said to you, come to me and I will make your life easy. Never said that. Jesus has never said, come to me and you're going to be rich and healthy and live a really long life. He never said that. He never said, come to me and you'll be sheltered from the storms. No, actually, the wise person and the foolish person get the same exact weather. You can go back and read it. It's the same exact wind and torrent and hail and storm. They get the same. And I love this about Jesus because no one else in the world today is telling us the truth. All of the people that we listen to, your Edward Jones person, your doctor, your nutritionist, your life coach, are all trying to tell you that if you do this thing and you listen to me, you will live a lot longer and be a lot happier. And not one of them tells you that you're going to go through some hard stuff, and if you listen to their advice, you're going to be able to make it through it with security. But Jesus has the courage and audacity, clarity, conviction, and kindness to tell each and every one of us the truth. In this world, you will have trouble. And he says, only those who have actually done the work to dig down to the bedrock of my teachings and puts those teachings into practice, only those will their lives survive. Practice. I kind of love that Jesus throws down the gauntlet on the word practice. Both the wise and the foolish person get the teaching. And I'm not against teaching. I am a teaching pastor. Jesus was a great teacher. We're in on teaching here at Heartland. But we understand that our day and age has an information action break in it. And Jesus tries to repair it. He says, listen, if you want your life to matter, you will do what I say. You will actually practice what I've preached. What's the difference in your life between condemnation and salvation? It is the practice of God to us in giving Jesus. And it is our wisdom of following Jesus fully, which proves the wisdom of our King. Practice. Our faith is not merely an intellectual pursuit. I'm kind of preaching to myself because of the 2 degrees that I have and the type of family that I come out of is one who's written a lot about the intelligence of faith and how our faith is informed. And we are not blindly following Jesus, but we have information that informs our faith. But at the end of the day, at the end of the greatest sermon ever preached, Jesus simply looks at us and says, listen, I've given you all of my teachings, but you are foolish if you're being fooled into thinking that you don't have to do what I say. It's practice. Practice is the vision of our church. Not just to inform us and teach us, but actually to walk out the life of faith with other people together. To actually have the practice of the rhythms of prayer and confession and repentance and worship, of baptism and communion, of storytelling and celebration. To actually walk out this life following the ways of Jesus. I want to ask you the question, are you practicing the way of Jesus? The foolish person looks at Jesus and hears his teachings and says, yeah, but tell me more. The wise person says, I've heard all I need to hear. You've given me the road to life. Let me walk it out. Practice. Practice. It comes up 22 times in the Sermon on the Mount, and most of those occurrences are right here at the end. Jesus' promise and his claim is that those who practice his word will have a solidity to their lives. We started this series back in January, and we finish it today. This is the last of the teachings on the greatest sermon ever. And if you would have told me that, Dan, you're going to learn a lot about God in these coming up 4 months, not just in your head knowledge, but in your heart knowledge of God, in your experience of him, in your daily living, you're going to find God in a way that you've never found him before, I probably would have raised my eyebrows. I probably would have been one of those people that would have been like, no, it's more of an if trials come as opposed to a when trials come type of person. But many of you know, just a couple of weeks into this series, my family received a diagnosis, a medical diagnosis for one of my kids that changed our lives forever. The type of thing that which I had fantasized about in days before, wondering if ever that would happen to me, I don't know how I would make it. Wondering if ever, you hear about stories, hard stories, and thinking man, if ever that was my kid, would I curse God? Would I give up? Would I be in a fetal position? And I thought to myself, yeah, I probably would. This past March, I can place myself in the hospital, in the room. A guy with the last name Jacobsen, my last name, told me the words about my son's condition. And in that moment, I wanted to throw up. I wanted to give up. I wanted to curse. And something incredible happened as the wind started to pick up in our lives, as we started to feel the rain, as we started to see the lightning. Both my wife and I, standing in the hallway of an ER, used the same exact word to describe what we were feeling, even though neither one of us talked about it. The word was solid. That no matter what we're facing, for some reason we feel held in the midst of the storm. That no matter what we don't know what the future looks like, there's a solidity to our feet that we can't describe that I would have imagined wouldn't be there. And I love this church so much because a lot of you are really practical people, and you're you took me aside privately. Some of you we went on walks together, and you were dude, it's okay to curse every once in a while because this stinks. It's okay to fall apart, is what many of you have told me. And there's been moments of that, you guys. But the prevailing reality for our lives is that what Jesus has said is true, has been what I felt, has been what I've experienced, and has been what I pray for all of us. Our church wants more peace in the midst of our storms. Our church wants more hope in the midst of the hardship. Our church, I desperately want for you to face the unknown future with a confidence knowing that God is with you, that God is on your side, that God is for you. And Jesus says, I'm so for you. I'm so with you that I've given you everything you need to live for a good life, a life of godliness, that if you just do what I say, it will go well for you. And I want that for our church. We want that so much that we've changed even the way that our church is structured to increase the practical rhythms of our church and the faith that we walk out together, to be more of an active church as opposed to a receiving type of church. There has been a history of our church where it was okay for you just to come and see. Just come and see. Come be as you are. Just be here. Just come see what Jesus is like. And there is a strong record in Jesus' own teaching that says that's a right way to handle people. But no longer is Heartland just a come and see type of church, because the greatest teaching that we've ever received ends not with a come and see, but with a go and walk out. Go and do this in your actual life. Go and practice this in front of people, in front of a starving world who doesn't need more cultural Christians or more conventional wisdom or more cliches in their life, but needs actual depth, bedrock faith, in which you just walk out this life trying your hardest, just trying your best. Jesus doesn't want you to get it perfect. He knows you're not going to get it perfect. He just wants you to try, to not to win, but to practice, right? Was it Allen Iverson who dissed practice? What are we talking about? Practice, practice, practice. You know what the whole entire Christian life is? It's practice. It's practice. Not practicing to get yourself out of hell. Jesus has done that. Thanks be to God our Father and Lord Jesus Christ, who has rescued us from the dominion of darkness. That's what God has done. But it's the practice of Ephesians 2. By grace you've been saved by faith. This is not of yourself. It's a gift of God so that no one can boast. And verse 10 tells us this. For you are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus, to carry out the good works in which he has prepared in advance for you. You can be a foolish, saved Christian who hears the words of Jesus and like a vapor just ignores them. Or what Jesus is calling us to, what Jesus is calling me to, what Jesus is calling you to. You could be the type of person that's not afraid of getting your hands dirty and chip it away at some bedrock to actually sink the truths of what he teaches deep into your soul so that you give more value to his words than you do your financial planner's words. So that you give more value to his principles than you do the ones that you find on Instagram. So that you actually follow out his way as opposed to the voices all around you who are leading you to this or to that. Jesus says so much is at stake. Don't be the type of person who ignores his teachings only to watch your entire life be unhinged from its foundation. What a waste. What a waste. And so Jesus tells us, in the future, there's a lot of blessings. In the present, there's a lot of trials. Trying his way, and times that will try you, trials. And I want to be the type of person who can be 90 years old. And I look back at my life, and I can see some storm shutters that have been blown off my house, but see a foundation that is enduring for generations to come. I bet that's you too. Jesus, we have your teachings. Our problem is not information. Our problem is simply action. And you motivate us with your future to give you our hearts and our minds and our souls and our wills and our bodies and our strength. So would you make us the type of people whose foundations in life are secure, so that no matter what comes our way, we can be solid in you. Would you stand?